I drove more than 2 hours through winding Texas backroads to reach my Silverwood Lake retreat, the one place that had managed to hold on to a sense of peace after Elaine passed away. But as the gravel crunched beneath my tires and the cabin came into view, something in my chest tightened. The house felt different before I even stepped out of the car. And then I saw them. My son, Ryan, sat comfortably in my old chair on the porch, his wife Sophia leaning close beside him, while her parents Charles and Linda Bennett sipped wine like they'd been there for years. Ryan looked straight at me, calm and deliberate, and said words I never thought I'd hear from my only child. "Dad, you're not allowed here anymore. This is their house now." For a second, I couldn't breathe. I smiled faintly, the kind of slow, deliberate smile people mistake for surrender. But inside, something colder started taking shape. In that moment, I decided they would never forget this day. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. It helps us reach more people who love stories like this. I tightened my grip on the handle of my weekend bag, the veins on my wrist pushing hard against the skin, and took in the scene, my memories, my wife's touch, my work being erased before my eyes. What they didn't know yet, what none of them could possibly see, was that they had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And in my world, once a boundary breaks, everything changes. I didn't argue, not yet. I let the silence hang in the air between us, a silence Ryan mistook for weakness, for acceptance. Sophia sipped her wine delicately, the glass cradled in her fingers like an accessory for a photo shoot, while her parents leaned back in their chairs as though the porch, the lake, and the fading sunlight all belonged to them now. Linda gave me the kind of polite, superior half-smile you reserve for someone you believe you've outmaneuvered. Charles offered me a single nod, the kind you give a handyman who just finished his job. My throat felt dry, but my voice was steady when I finally spoke. "Excuse me?" Ryan didn't blink. "You heard me, Dad. We're staying for the weekend. Sophia's parents are settling in, too. We've decided it makes more sense this way." His words weren't just disrespectful, they were final, cold, like a door slamming shut. I glanced past him into the living room, where Elaine's knitted throw blanket was draped neatly over the couch we picked out together. A stack of cedar coasters I'd made one summer in my workshop sat on the coffee table, and Linda's wine glass rested directly on the wood. That tiny detail the casual disregard lodged itself in me like a splinter. I set my weekend bag down slowly, the weight pulling against my arm, and looked Ryan in the eye. "Since when does something I bought, built, and maintained suddenly belong to someone else without my say?" Sophia set her glass down on the railing, her posture relaxed, her tone sharp. "Since we decided it makes more sense, David. You hardly come up here anymore. The house just sits empty while Charles and Linda need a place. It's selfish to let it waste away." That word selfish hung in the air like smoke. I thought of the 2-hour drive I made just last month to sand the porch railing, the new screens I'd installed on the doors the month before that, the roof repairs I'd done by hand. I hadn't abandoned the place, but none of that mattered to them. It was never about me. It was about control. Charles finally spoke, his voice coated in false courtesy. "We're grateful for your generosity, David. Truly, we'll take good care of it." I didn't answer him. My eyes stayed locked on my son, searching for some flicker of hesitation, some sign that this wasn't really his idea, but Ryan didn't flinch. There was a time when a single look from me would make him sit up straighter, rethink his words, choose respect. Somewhere between his college graduation and this porch, he'd decided he was the one giving orders now. The sunlight was sinking low over Silverwood Lake, throwing copper streaks across the rippling water. Elaine used to love this hour. She'd sit with me by the dock, her hand resting lightly on mine, and we'd count the tiny circles made by the ripples until the sun disappeared behind the trees. That memory rose, sharp and uninvited, only to dissolve under the weight of what I was seeing now. My son, my only child, was cutting me out of the one place where she still felt close. I stepped up onto the porch, my shoes scraping against the old wood. No one moved to make room. "I drove 2 hours to be here," I said, my voice calm but iron-wrapped. "I'd like to come inside." Ryan leaned back in the chair that used to be mine, resting one ankle over his knee like he'd practiced the gesture. "Not today," he said evenly. "We've got dinner plans. You'd just be in the way." "In the way?" I looked at each of them in turn, at Linda adjusting her shawl like she was preparing for a performance, at Sophia with that faint smirk curling her lips, at Charles topping off his glass without looking up. Finally, I nodded once, the word tasting metallic as it left my mouth. "Enjoy your evening." I turned, walked down the steps, and crossed the gravel drive back to my car. Their voices followed me, Ryan's laugh, Linda asking about the wine's vintage, Sophia remarking about the view until I shut the door, and the sound disappeared behind the glass. The engine roared to life, the German precision humming beneath the hood, and I eased the car into reverse, catching one last glimpse of them on the porch. Ryan didn't watch me leave. He was already deep in conversation, erasing me from the scene as effortlessly as he'd erased my claim to the house. The road away from Silverwood Lake curved through a stretch of pine that always smelled like rain, even on the driest days. Elaine loved that smell. We used to roll the windows down on summer drives, her laughter spilling out into the wind, her hair whipping across her face as she reached to turn up the radio. My grip tightened on the wheel. My son had just told me I wasn't welcome at the one place where I still felt her, and the worst part wasn't the audacity of it. It was how easy it seemed for him. No hesitation, no flicker of guilt. By the time I merged onto the highway, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the air cooler, heavier somehow. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, the screen lighting up briefly with Ryan's name, but I didn't reach for it. Not yet. I wanted silence, needed it, because something inside me was shifting something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was colder than that. Colder and steadier. By the time I reached my driveway in Austin, the dashboard clock read 9:07 p.m. The house was dark, except for the porch light. Elaine used to insist we keep on. "A home should never greet you in darkness," she'd said once, and I'd never forgotten it. Inside, I set my bag down and stood there in the quiet, keys still in hand. The silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt hollow, empty in a way that had nothing to do with walls or furniture. I made coffee I didn't need just to have something to do with my hands, then carried the mug to my study and sat in the leather chair that had molded perfectly to me over the years. Across the room, a framed photo of Elaine sat on the bookshelf taken right there at the lake one summer evening, the sunlight turning her hair into copper fire. I stared at it for a long time, thinking about what she would have said if she'd been on that porch with me today. Elaine didn't raise her voice often, but when she did, the air changed. She wouldn't have let Ryan finish that sentence. The phone buzzed again. This time, I picked it up. A text from my son. "Just so you know, we've decided the lake house will be theirs permanently. Don't come back. No explanation, no discussion, just a line drawn across something that wasn't his to give." I set the phone down face first on the desk and stared at the dark window until my own reflection blurred. I'd spent 3 years since Elaine passed, saying yes to every request, writing checks without question, showing up when asked, disappearing when not. I'd told myself it was for the sake of staying close to my only child, for the sake of preserving the family Elaine cherished. But families don't take what's yours and tell you you're not welcome. Families don't erase your name from the door of your own home. And as I took a slow sip of bitter coffee, one truth settled in my chest like bedrock. Ryan thought I'd roll over like I always had. He thought wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I showered, brushed my teeth, even flipped through the sports section of the Sunday paper, but my mind refused to quiet. By the time I lay down, the ceiling above me might as well have been a blank blueprint, waiting for lines, angles, and instructions. Monday, the 8th of April. Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday, the 13th of April. The dates line themselves up in my head like milestones on a construction schedule, because that's how my mind worked after 35 years in the industry. Break the job into phases, know your deadlines, and most importantly, figure out the other side's weak points. Ryan had given me one without realizing it. "We're moving them in next weekend," he'd said like it was already carved into stone. That wasn't vague. That was a fixed target, and a fixed target can be hit from a dozen angles. I stared at the empty space beside me where Elaine used to sleep, her words echoing faintly in my head. Measure twice, cut once. She'd hated deadlines, but she loved preparation, and preparation was exactly what I needed. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, made coffee black and strong, and sat at the table with a yellow legal pad. At the top, I wrote one word in block letters: options. Under it, I made a list. Legal defense, Jonathan Park. Locks and access controls, possible escalation. Surveillance and monitoring. Psychological deterrent. Public embarrassment. Risky but effective. I stared at the list for a long moment, crossing out options and writing advantages instead, because this wasn't about negotiating anymore. This was about control. Rule 1. Never negotiate from desperation. Rule 2. Control the information. Rule 3. Own the timing. I called Jonathan first. He'd been my attorney for nearly 20 years, handling everything from property disputes to contract negotiations, and he picked up on the second ring. "David, what's going on?" he asked. His voice clipped, efficient, and calm. "I need the Silverwood Lake retreat locked down," I said. "Tighter than a bank vault. I want every document, every title, every right reviewed and reinforced. No one touches it." He didn't ask why, he didn't have to. "Bring me everything you've got," Jonathan said. "Title deed, tax records, purchase history. We'll make it airtight." That was the foundation, but I needed more than paperwork. Ryan didn't fear consequences he couldn't see. He needed to feel them. That's where Kevin came in. Kevin Tran lived 3 houses down, a wiry, brilliant guy in his early 40s whose garage looked like a NASA lab exploded inside it. He owed me a favor. I'd helped him after a burst pipe nearly ruined his basement last winter, and when I knocked on his door Tuesday morning, he raised an eyebrow before stepping aside to let me in. His office was chaos. 3 monitors glowing, circuit boards scattered across the desk, bundles of cables hanging from hooks on the wall. "I need your help with a project," I said, sitting across from him. "What kind of project?" he asked cautiously. "One involving motion sensors, light control, automated audio, and maybe a few visual effects," I replied, letting the words settle before adding, "It has to trigger automatically when someone enters the house, and it has to make them leave." Kevin's lips curled into the faintest grin. "Like a haunted house?" "Something like that," I said, "except this isn't for fun." He leaned back, tapped his pen against his knee, and nodded once. "All right, I can make that happen." By the end of our meeting, he had sketched out a setup that made my legal pad look amateur. Motion, activated lights designed to strobe in rapid, disorienting sequences, directional speakers hidden in vents, capable of whispering directly into a person's ear without anyone else hearing it, compact projectors casting ghostly shadows onto the walls, and a central control hub I could manage remotely from Austin. "You want water systems tied in?" Kevin asked, and when I nodded, his grin widened. Showers, faucets, sinks all on command. It was perfectly legal, just smart home functions used in ways no one expected. By the time I left, Kevin's SUV was half loaded with sensors, light strips, hidden projectors, wireless triggers, and enough tech to turn my peaceful retreat into a fortress disguised as a home. The foundation was set. The frame was rising. And in my head, the blueprint was nearly complete. Saturday, the 13th of April, was coming fast, and Ryan had no idea the house he thought he was taking was already preparing to fight back. Kevin arrived at my driveway just after 7 a.m. Wednesday morning, his SUV packed so full of gear it looked like he was preparing to wire an entire hotel. Boxes of motion sensors, spools of programmable LED strips, mini projectors no bigger than my palm, wireless speakers, backup batteries, and a tablet loaded with custom control software, every piece labeled, cataloged, and ready. We didn't speak much on the 2-hour drive to Silverwood Lake. My mind was elsewhere, replaying the memory of Ryan sitting in my chair like he'd earned it, Linda's smug half-smile, Sophia's casual dismissal. By the time we turned off the highway, the pine-lined road winding toward the retreat, my jaw was set like stone. When the cabin came into view, it was quiet, still carrying the faint scent of cedar cleaner from my last visit, as if the place itself was holding its breath. We unloaded the gear and started in the entryway. Kevin mounted the first motion detector above the front door, syncing it to the tablet, then handed it to me. "When this trips," he said, tapping a setting, "the living room lights strobe red and white, and the voice assistant triggers its warning." I tested it, and a calm, firm voice filled the empty space. "Attention. Unauthorized occupants detected. Leave immediately. A low current of satisfaction ran through me. Not joy, not revenge, just control returning to where it belonged. From there, we moved room by room. Upstairs, Kevin placed compact projectors in the corners, their lenses angled to throw tall, shifting shadows down the hallway walls. Even knowing it was programmed light, I caught myself tightening instinctively when one flickered to life. Imagine walking here at 2 in the morning after a glass of wine, Kevin murmured with a grin. In the guest rooms, two smaller projectors were programmed to flash faint figures at irregular intervals, just enough to catch the edge of someone's vision without being obvious. In the kitchen, Kevin installed valve controllers beneath the sinks, syncing them so the faucets would erupt on command, water roaring in stainless steel basins like a storm surge. Tiny speakers, each one carefully hidden behind bookshelves, under chairs, tucked into vents, layered the next part of the trap. Soft creaks, muffled footsteps, and whispers pitched just below comprehension, designed to unsettle without revealing their source. This all runs on its own closed network, Kevin explained as he slid cables behind a baseboard. They won't be able to shut it down by cutting Wi-Fi or flipping breakers. Backup power's in the basement, 2 deep cycle batteries. You'd have to tear the place apart to even find them. I nodded, picturing Ryan trying to outsmart a system designed specifically to outsmart him. By mid-afternoon, the house looked unchanged to the untrained eye. The throw blanket Elaine knitted, still draped over the couch. The photographs still lined the mantel. The rug still lay perfectly straight beneath the coffee table. But every surface, every threshold, every quiet corner was now alive, wired, and waiting. That was the beauty of Kevin's work. Nothing called attention to itself. The danger was invisible, silent, patient. We tested the sequences systematically, starting in the living room. Kevin stepped into view, the sensor clicked, and the lights flared, strobes pulsing in sharp rhythm, the voice assistant escalating its warning as he moved deeper into the space. Upstairs, the hallway projector threw its pacing shadow across the wall while a directional speaker whispered directly into his right ear. "You shouldn't be here." "Step left," the whisper vanished. "Step back." It returned, cold and intimate. Kevin let out a low whistle. "That'll get inside their heads." We moved through each room, each scenario. Lights, whispers, footsteps, shadows, faucets flooding, a crescendo of sensory overload, and then, within 60 seconds of stillness, the system reset itself, silent and ready to trigger again. By the time the sun dipped toward the water, the retreat was transformed. Outside, the lake reflected streaks of hammered copper light across the glass windows, and for a moment I imagined Elaine standing on the porch, hands clasped, her quiet presence softening the edges of this entire war. But there was no softness now. I stood in the doorway, taking one final look at the place, every chair in its place, every curtain drawn just so, and set the system to stand by. From the outside, it was still the peaceful sanctuary I had built 15 years ago. On the inside, it was a fortress with teeth. We locked up, loaded Kevin's tools back into the SUV, and drove away under the heavy silence of pine shadows stretching across the road. That night in Austin, I sat in my study long after dark, the control tablet glowing softly on the desk beside me. 5 camera feeds from Silverwood Lake lined the screen. Entryway, living room, kitchen, hallway, upstairs landing. All still, all waiting. At 8:42 p.m., my phone buzzed with a new message from Ryan. "We'll be there around 2 p.m. Saturday. Don't bother coming up." I stared at the screen, the corners of my mouth lifting almost involuntarily. He'd just given me the last piece I needed. An exact time, an exact day, a fixed target. They thought they were walking into their victory. They didn't know the house was already awake, already listening, already ready to greet them on my terms. Saturday, the 13th of April, 1:52 p.m. The camera feed from the entryway showed the lake behind the cabin, still and sharp under the spring sunlight, a blue sheet of glass broken only by the occasional ripple of wind. I sat in my study in Austin, 200 miles away. The control tablet angled toward me, phone beside it, every system armed and ready, sensors primed, audio cued, shadows waiting, water controls live. At 2:01 p.m., a silver SUV appeared on the driveway camera, sunlight catching its hood as it rolled across the gravel like it belonged there. Ryan was behind the wheel, Sophia in the passenger seat, sunglasses perched on her head, and Charles and Linda Bennett in the back, leaning forward with the eager posture of tourists seeing their vacation home for the first time. They didn't even pause to admire the view. As soon as the SUV stopped, all four doors opened, bodies spilling out with the entitled rhythm of people who believed they'd already claimed ownership. Ryan popped the rear hatch, pulling out a duffel bag and gesturing toward the porch like a man directing movers. Sophia held her phone in one hand, pointing at things like she was cataloging her new territory. Charles hefted a rolling suitcase while Linda clutched a large canvas tote, the kind of bag that says, "I'm settling in for a long stay." Through the entryway microphone, I heard the crunch of gravel under their shoes, a gull crying faintly over the lake, and then Charles stopped, his voice rising faintly. "What the hell is this?" I watched them gather around the brushed steel plate mounted on a cedar backing, Kevin's handiwork gleaming in the sunlight. "Welcome to the house of the future. Enter at your own risk." Linda's hand tightened on her tote. "This feels wrong," she murmured. Charles squinted at the plate, scoffing. "Some kind of joke." Sophia laughed lightly, waving it off. "That's just David being weird. He's always pulling little stunts. Ignore it." Ryan didn't even look at the sign. "Come on," he said sharply, walking straight past it, fishing a key from his pocket. My key, copied from the spare I gave him years ago, and sliding it into the lock. The door opened smoothly without resistance. "Welcome home," he said over his shoulder, leading them inside. On my screen, the living room camera came alive, capturing them stepping one by one across the rug. Elaine and I had chosen together in Santa Fe 15 years earlier. Linda's voice carried through the microphone. "Oh, it's even nicer than I imagined." Charles set his suitcase by the stairs. "Feels like a proper home," he said, stretching his arms. Sophia drifted toward the kitchen, pulling a wine bottle from her bag and humming softly. Ryan stood in the center of the room, hands on his hips, surveying the space like a man inspecting property he'd just closed on. I let them move freely for the next hour. They unpacked, adjusted couch cushions, changed the thermostat, poured wine into my glasses, their laughter floating through the microphones like little barbs of arrogance. The tablet tracked their movements, each motion sensor lighting up as they wandered through the rooms, but I didn't trigger a single thing yet. Patience was key. Let them get comfortable. Let them believe they belonged. By 8:37 p.m., the sun had slipped behind the tree line, the lake turning to dark glass beneath the fading twilight. Upstairs, the landing camera showed Charles heading to the guest room in pajama pants, Linda already curled up in bed with a paperback, Sophia rinsing dishes in the kitchen, and Ryan sprawled across the couch, scrolling his phone with a satisfied smirk, the smugness of someone convinced the fight was over. That was when I leaned forward in my chair, tapped the command icon on the tablet, and whispered into the empty room, "Let's begin." The system came alive instantly. Lights across the villa exploded into a violent strobe, not a soft club pulse, but jagged, erratic flashes alternating between red, blue, and white, slicing through shadows and throwing the walls into chaos. Upstairs, the first projector activated, casting the silhouette of a pacing figure onto the hallway wall, tall and distorted, its movements slow, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Hidden speakers came to life next, layering soft, dissonant whispers just below comprehension enough to make you question if you'd imagined them, until they built into an overlapping murmur that crawled along the edges of sanity. In the kitchen, the faucets roared open, water gushing from the stainless steel sinks with mechanical ferocity, splashing violently against the metal. On the landing camera, Charles stumbled into the hallway, shielding his eyes from the flashing lights. "Linda!" he shouted, voice sharp with panic. "What the hell's going on?" Linda's voice floated faintly from the guest room. There's someone in here." Sophia appeared in the living room feed, head whipping back and forth as shadows seemed to slide across the walls, figures she couldn't quite focus on. "Ryan, did you set something up?" Ryan bolted upright, confusion etched across his face. "It's probably just a power surge." He froze mid-sentence as the voice assistant overrode every other sound, its calm, detached tone cutting like glass. "Attention, unauthorized occupants detected. Leave the premises immediately." Then, the directional audio kicked in. I watched Ryan freeze as an invisible whisper slithered into his right ear alone. "Get out!" He spun around, eyes darting wildly, but Sophia and her parents were already moving toward the kitchen, struggling with the faucets. Sophia twisted the handles, but the water didn't stop. Charles yanked at the fridge door as if it might shut everything down. Linda clutched the doorway, wide-eyed, as another shadow slid across the ceiling, this one slower, heavier, purposeful. Upstairs, the guest room projector activated, throwing the silhouette of a tall, unmoving figure into the doorway, its head tilted unnaturally, watching without blinking. Linda's scream pierced the microphones, sharp and high, the kind of sound that makes your chest tighten instinctively. "Ryan!" she cried. "Call the police!" Ryan fumbled with his phone, but I already knew how that would end a perfectly functioning smart home system. Not a single broken lock, not a single illegal action to report. The landing feed showed Charles grabbing Linda's arm, pulling her toward the stairs, while Sophia's voice overlapped his. "I can't get the front door open!" I leaned closer to the tablet, smiling faintly as the smart lock delay kicked in 30 seconds, designed to make them feel trapped, to make the walls seem like they were closing in. Ryan tugged violently at the handle, shoulders tensing, Sophia pounding on the door in panic, until finally, with a sharp click, it released. They spilled onto the porch, stumbling into the night air, breaths ragged, movements frantic, wine glasses abandoned, suitcases forgotten. Within seconds, they were in the SUV, headlights flaring, tires spitting gravel as they tore down the driveway into the black stretch of trees beyond. I sat back in my chair, hands resting lightly on the armrests, my breathing even, my pulse steady. The villa was silent again, every light reset, every whisper quiet, every shadow gone as if nothing had happened. On the screen, the empty living room stared back at me, calm and untouched. Ryan thought he was claiming his victory today. Instead, he just walked into mine. Sunday morning, 7:16 a.m., the phone rang, Ryan's name lighting up the screen, and for a long second I just let it vibrate against the desk. The Silverwood Lake feed still open on the tablet beside me, showing the empty living room bathed in soft morning light. On the fourth ring, I answered, my voice warm enough to sound believable, neutral enough to give nothing away. "Morning, son." What came back wasn't a greeting. It was a brittle, sharp edge ground down by sleeplessness and panic. "What the hell did you do, Dad?" His voice cracked, too high for control. The sound of someone trying to sound angry but bleeding fear through every syllable. I leaned back in my chair. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Don't play games with me," he snapped, breath ragged through the line. "The house went insane last night, lights flashing, water pouring everywhere, voices screaming at us to leave. Madison's parents are shaken. Sophia's crying. Linda thought she saw someone standing in the hall." He stopped himself, like admitting it made it real. I let a beat of silence pass before answering, low and measured. "That sounds terrifying," I said softly. "Did you call anyone?" "We called the police," he hissed, spitting the words like shrapnel. "They searched the whole place at 6 this morning. Said everything was fine. But it wasn't fine, and you know it." "Well," I replied lightly, sipping my coffee, "at least you know the house is secure." There was a long silence, broken only by his unsteady breathing, and then his voice dropped, colder this time, deliberate in its threat. "This isn't over. We're still moving them in next weekend. You can't stop this." I glanced at the control tablet where the feeds showed sunlit stillness, the retreat quiet, waiting untouched. "Maybe," I said softly. "The house doesn't like strangers." For 10 seconds, he said nothing, and then his voice came back, lower now. Something close to fear threaded beneath the words. "I underestimated you," he whispered. "That's been known to happen," I replied, and the line went dead. I set the phone down gently, fingers drumming once on the wood, my mind already shifting gears. The performance was done. Act 2 was over. Act 3, the final move, would be paper, signatures, and law. I spent the rest of the morning gathering every file I had. The original purchase documents from 15 years ago, title deed, tax records, insurance papers, renovation permits. By noon, I was sitting across from Jonathan Park in his downtown Austin office, his pen poised over a yellow legal pad as I laid out everything. "I want it locked down," I said, leaning forward. "Not just temporarily. Permanently. I don't want Ryan, Sophia, her parents, anyone claiming this property again. Ever." Jonathan sat back, eyes narrowing slightly as he processed. "Okay," he said finally, measured and calm. We have options. Cleanest path? Transfer it into an irrevocable charitable trust or donate it outright to an organization you choose. Once recorded, it's off the table, no claims, no disputes, no leverage for anyone. I thought of Elaine's voice, soft but steady, talking years ago about the Freedom Haven Foundation, the nonprofit she used to volunteer with that built retreats for military veterans and families recovering from PTSD. Freedom Haven, I said, and Jonathan nodded immediately, already scribbling notes. Perfect candidate. We'll draft a deed of gift, include a clause granting you lifetime honorary access. You'll retain full usage rights without owning the property outright. It'll be ironclad. How fast can we do it? I asked, and he didn't hesitate. I can have paperwork ready within 48 hours. Once it's recorded with the county, it's untouchable. He can hire every lawyer in Texas, it won't matter. For the first time in days, something loosened in my chest. Just slightly, but I kept my face impassive, my voice steady. Do it. Jonathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. David, this will go public once the transfer records. Everyone will know. Are you prepared for that fallout? I didn't blink. Let them know. I want them to. When I left his office, the Texas sun hit harder than it had in weeks, sharp and blinding against glass and steel, and for the first time since Ryan told me I wasn't welcome at my own retreat, I felt control settling back into my hands, quiet and deliberate, like gravity returning after freefall. Halfway to the parking garage, my phone buzzed again. Ryan? Against my better judgment, I answered, putting the call on speaker as I unlocked the car door. We need to settle this, he said immediately, his tone clipped, urgent. Sophia's parents are expecting to move in next weekend. Don't make this ugly. The only ugly thing here, I said, sliding into the driver's seat, is you thinking you can give away what isn't yours to give, he scoffed. You hardly use the place, Dad. They need it more than you. You're older now, alone. It's selfish to let it sit empty while they struggle. The words landed like small stones against steel, deliberate and meant to cut, but I didn't flinch. You don't get to decide what's selfish when it comes to what I built, I said evenly. I worked 30 years for that property, Ryan. Every beam, every stone, every screw, your mother and I earned it. His tone sharpened instantly. That's what fathers do. Provide. Take care of their family. That includes Sophia's parents, now their family. They're Sophia's family, I corrected, my voice like glass. I barely know them. You crossed a line you can't uncross. He fell silent for a moment, then said tightly, If you fight us, we'll take you to court. Harassment, emotional distress, elder exploitation will make it public. I smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. By the time you file anything, I said softly, you might want to check who actually owns the retreat. Another silence stretched on the line, heavier this time then. What did you do? He demanded, voice rising. I honored your mother's memory, I said calmly. Something you seem to have forgotten how to do. And without waiting for a reply, I ended the call. That evening, I sat in my study as the sun bled into the Austin skyline, the control tablet glowing beside me, the Silverwood Lake feeds open like quiet witnesses. Soon it wouldn't matter if Ryan called, threatened, or begged. Soon, the retreat would belong to a cause bigger than both of us, and all the locks he thought he could break would vanish beneath the weight of a single signature. For the first time since Elaine died, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was building something again. This time, though, I wasn't just defending a house. I was ending a war. Thursday morning, the sky over Austin was pale and sharp, the kind of brittle spring light that makes glass buildings look colder than steel. I stood outside Jonathan Park's office at 9:55 a.m., holding a folder under my arm, certified copies of the deed transfer, the gift agreement with Freedom Haven Foundation, and the clause granting me lifetime honorary access. The ink was dry, the records filed, the ownership beyond dispute. Inside, the receptionist looked up with a polite nod. Mr. Morgan, conference room B. They're already here. Of course they were. The insecure come early, the uninvited come angry. I stepped into the polished oak-paneled room, the faint scent of lemon polish mixing with the quiet hum of the HVAC system. Jonathan sat at the head of the table, his posture precise, a neat stack of papers aligned perfectly with the edge of his desk. Across from him sat Ryan, jaw clenched, Sophia next to him with her arms crossed tightly, and Charles and Linda Bennet on the bench behind them, dressed as if dignity could be ironed into fabric. I set my folder on the table, pulled out the chair beside Jonathan, and sat, folding my hands calmly. "Good morning," I said. No one returned it. Ryan leaned forward instantly. "We're here to resolve this now." Jonathan raised one palm without looking up. "No, Mr. Morgan," he said, voice clipped but even. "You're here to be informed. This is not a negotiation." The words landed like a hammer. Sophia let out a small, sharp laugh, brittle and humorless. "We'll see about that." Without acknowledging her, Jonathan slid a single printed page across the table, perfectly centered between us and them. "You can start by reviewing this, the County Recorder's Index. As of Tuesday, the 16th of April, at precisely 10:03 a.m., the recorded owner of the Silverwood Lake Retreat is the Freedom Haven Foundation. The gift deed, compliance affidavit, and transfer tax documentation are all executed, recorded, and in legal terms, irrevocable." Silence rolled through the room like pressure before a storm. Ryan blinked first, his jaw tightening as he searched the page like the words might rearrange themselves if he stared hard enough. "Irrevocable?" he repeated, disbelief curling around the syllables. "People reverse things like this all the time." Jonathan leaned back slightly, expression neutral, unshaken. "Not this. Not under Texas law. An irrevocable charitable transfer, executed in compliance with state and federal statutes, cannot be challenged by heirs, beneficiaries, or family members without standing. And you," he said, gaze steady, "have no standing." Sophia's manicured nails clicked against the table as she leaned in, her voice low but sharp. "You can't just give away generational property. He's my husband. That house is part of our family's future. We have rights." Jonathan glanced down at his notes, then back at her without expression. "No, Mrs. Morgan, you have no legal claim. Texas is not a community property state for post-retirement gifts when title is solely held. The retreat was purchased by Mr. Perpistes, Huething and Averia. Morgan, titled solely in his name, maintained solely by his funds, and conveyed to a registered nonprofit organization. Your familial rights exist only in language, not in statute." Charles cleared his throat, trying to summon authority that had no weight here. "We're not looking for trouble," he said, hands clasped like a man offering reason. "But we do need somewhere to live. We thought this made sense for everyone." I turned my gaze on him slowly, my voice level but edged with steel. "You thought you could move into a house that isn't yours, Charles. You thought you could tell me to leave my own porch. You thought wrong." Linda's lips trembled faintly as she leaned forward, hands flat on the table. "After everything our daughter has done for your son," she stopped herself abruptly, realizing perhaps that this wasn't the room where sentiment bought anything. Jonathan's calm voice filled the pause. "Furthermore," he said, sliding another document across the table, "this is a formal notice of no trespass and a cease harassment order on behalf of Mr. Morgan and the Freedom Haven Foundation. If any of you enter the Silverwood Lake property without Mr. Morgan's express written invitation as holder of lifetime access, you will be considered in criminal trespass. If you continue calls, texts, or coercive pressure, we will pursue remedies." Ryan leaned back, shoulders tight, anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Lifetime access?" he scoffed, his tone sharp, bitter. "So he gave it away and kept it?" Jonathan folded his hands calmly. "Mr. Morgan donated the property. In exchange, he retained a donor access privilege for personal use at the charity's discretion. That's perfectly lawful. He can stay there whenever the retreat isn't reserved for program use. You, however," he said, letting the weight of it sink in, "have no right to set foot inside." Ryan's jaw worked silently, his hand curling into a fist against the table. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked faintly at the edges, stripped of control. "So, he wins," he said flatly, eyes fixed on me. "This whole performance was just to drag us down here, sit us at this table, and make us watch him win." I held his stare, steady and unflinching. "I didn't win, Ryan," I said quietly. "I built something for your mother. I protected it when you tried to take it. There's a difference." Sophia's throat flushed crimson, anger spilling into her voice. We'll tell everyone what you did to us. Everyone will know what kind of father you are." Jonathan didn't blink. "You're welcome to share your version," he said evenly. "But the public record tells another story about a donor who gave a lakeside retreat to veterans and their families. The local paper has already picked it up. You may have seen the photos." Ryan's eyes flicked toward Sophia, something brittle breaking quietly between them. On the bench behind her, Linda's voice came small, shaky, trying one last angle. "We didn't mean harm, we thought it made sense. He's alone. He doesn't even use it." I looked at her, no anger in my voice now, only finality. "I use it, Linda. I use it to remember my wife. I use it to breathe when the rest of the world feels too loud. And if I didn't use it at all," I said softly, leaning forward, "it still wouldn't make it yours." Jonathan slid one final packet of papers across the table, certified copies of the deed transfer, the donor intent letter, and individualized notices addressed to each of them. "This concludes today's meeting," he said, voice calm but carrying weight. Ryan stared at the documents like they were written in a language he'd never learned. Then, slowly, he pushed his chair back, the screech of the legs cutting through the silence. At the door, he stopped, without turning around. "You know what the worst part is?" he said quietly, his voice rough around the edges. "I keep hearing Mom's voice telling me to be better than this, and I thought that voice would get quieter if I pushed hard enough." He swallowed, shoulders tight. It didn't. The door opened and shut behind him, and they filed out in silence. Not a family anymore, just four people bound by a failed plan and a shared loss they didn't know how to carry. The following Monday afternoon, I drove back to Silverwood Lake for the first time since everything had been finalized, the winding, pine-lined road opening into a view that still stole the air from my lungs. The sun hovered low, turning the lake's surface into hammered copper, and as I pulled into the gravel drive, I spotted a figure waiting on the porch. A woman in a navy jacket, clipboard tucked under one arm, hair pulled into a low knot. She stepped forward with a warm, professional smile. "Mr. Morgan," she said, offering her hand. "I'm Dana Ortiz, Program Director for the Freedom Haven Foundation." Her handshake was firm, but there was kindness in her eyes, the kind of quiet steadiness that makes you trust someone instantly. "We thought we'd keep the dedication small," she said softly. "This is still your space when you need it, but soon it'll belong to people who need it in ways most of us will never understand. You'll have your time here, and when our clients come up, they'll have theirs." Inside, the air was different. The house no longer carried tension in its silence. The walls weren't bracing for conflict anymore. The projectors and hidden speakers Kevin had installed were gone, packed up weeks ago and returned with a thank you bottle of bourbon he pretended he didn't earn. Now, there was only wood and soap and light spilling across the cedar floors. Dana walked beside me as we moved from room to room, listening as I showed her where Elaine used to read by the front window, where the morning sun hit perfectly in winter, which kitchen drawers stuck when the barometer fell. She took notes like a steward, not a guest, careful with her questions, careful with the space. "We're bringing a small group next month," she said, lowering her voice slightly. 5 couples to start. 2 are Gold Star families. 1 is a father and son trying to talk for the first time in years. The idea is to give them breathing room, quiet somewhere to remember who they are without the weight of noise. I nodded, feeling the words settle deep, like stones at the bottom of the lake. "That's what this house does," I said quietly. We were standing at the window overlooking the dock when the low crunch of tires on gravel broke the silence. Dana glanced at me, brows raised slightly. "Expecting someone?" she asked. "No," I said, though I knew immediately who it was. The sound of that SUV had been burned into my memory like a scar. The knock came sharp, quick, insistent enough to rattle the deadbolt, but I opened the door only because I chose to, not because anyone on the other side had earned the right. Ryan stood there alone, sunlight bleaching his face into something younger, thinner, almost fragile. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he shifted, holding a cardboard carrier with 2 cups of coffee in his left hand. "I brought this," he said, voice quiet, almost cautious. "Don't know if you still drink it this late." I took the tray without answering, stepped aside, and gestured him in. Dana slipped into the kitchen, giving us space, but staying close enough to sense if the air turned sharp again. Ryan stood in the living room, taking it in the same living room that had turned against him weeks ago, the same walls that had whispered into his ears and thrown shadows across his vision. His shoulders rose and fell slowly, like he was trying to regulate a heartbeat that hadn't caught up to the quiet. "Is it true?" he asked finally, glancing at the framed certificate Dana had propped temporarily on the mantel, gifted by David Morgan in honor of Elaine Morgan. "It's true," I said. "It's done." He nodded once, jaw tight, his voice low when he spoke again. "I said some awful things." "You did," I agreed, letting the words sit there without dressing them up, without rescuing him from their weight. He looked down, then up at me, his eyes flicking like he was searching for the right sentence and coming up short. "Sophia," he started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "I thought if I pushed hard enough, you'd just give in like you used to." I didn't move, didn't soften. "For years," I said evenly, "I mistook kindness for surrender. That's on me. But this was never yours to take." He nodded, almost imperceptibly, his throat tight, and when he finally spoke again, his voice cracked faintly. "Do you hate me?" I set the coffee tray on the table between us, the cardboard slightly damp from condensation. "No," I said after a long pause, "but I stopped letting you make me small. For a second, I saw him as the boy who used to drop a baseball in the driveway and glance at me, expecting I'd help him find it before it rolled into the street. That boy was still somewhere behind his tired eyes, buried under years of pride and distance. "What happens now?" he asked finally, almost like a whisper. Behind me, Dana cleared her throat gently, reminding us both that this wasn't our house anymore, not in the way it used to be. "Now," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you go home. You figure out who you want to be besides entitled. Then one day, if you can walk into a room without looking for an angle, you call me. Until then," I nodded toward the lake, "this place has work to do." He breathed out slowly, shoulders dropping a fraction, absorbing the boundary without fighting it this time. His gaze swept the room once more, lingered on the photo of Elaine above the mantel, then shifted back to me. "Busy," he said softly, like he was testing the weight of the word, and I nodded once in return. He left without another word, his footsteps fading across the porch, gravel crunching under the tires until the sound dissolved into the tree line. Dana joined me by the window, standing in the quiet we both understood, the kind that follows endings that aren't victories but shifts. "You okay?" she asked finally, her voice careful, not soft. I stood there, watching the lake move beneath the fading light, and exhaled something I'd been holding for months. "Better than okay," I said, and for the first time I believed it. The first snow came earlier than forecast, drifting softly across the glassy surface of Silverwood Lake, blanketing the pines in a fragile white hush. I'd driven up that morning with a thermos of coffee, a stack of old photographs, and no plan beyond being here, needing to see what the house had become now that it belonged to something bigger than me. The villa sat quiet against the gray sky, smoke curling faintly from the chimney, as Dana's small team prepared for the first Freedom Haven retreat group to arrive. Inside, the silence was different now. Before, it had been defensive, the kind of silence that holds its breath, waiting for someone to claim it. Now it was open, steady, a kind of breathing all its own. I set my thermos on the kitchen counter and spotted a note from Dana, her handwriting neat and restrained. 5 couples arrive Friday, 2 Gold Star families. One father and son, both veterans, trying to talk for the first time in years. She signed it simply, D, a looping underline like even her pen understood the value of restraint. The weight of that line caught me. The house was finally doing what Elaine once dreamed it could do, holding space for people learning to live with their wounds. Outside, the lake was shifting under the cold, its reflective summer surface gone, replaced by steel-gray water textured with slow-moving ripples. I carried my coffee down to the dock, standing at its edge, letting the icy wind slip beneath my collar. Elaine and I used to sit here at this very spot in late winter, wrapped in old blankets, passing a single mug back and forth while the ducks traced lazy paths across the far side of the lake. I thought of her now, the way she'd tilt her head when she listened, the way her presence could make any space feel softer without a single word spoken. The crunch of tires on gravel pulled me from the thought, a familiar sound now, but when I turned, The truck that rolled halfway up the drive wasn't Ryan's newer SUV. This one was older, early 2002, the paint dulled by sun, but still moving with purpose. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered, maybe mid-40s, with the posture of someone unused to entering another man's property uninvited. His jacket was brown, frayed at the cuffs, hair threaded with early gray. He raised a hand as he approached the dock. "You, Morgan?" he called, his voice deep, clipped, steady. "I am," I said, standing firm, the boards under my boots creaking softly. "Name's Ray Torres," he said, stopping just short of the last plank. "My unit served with a man named Daniel Price. He told me about this place, said it was going to be for guys like us. He was right, wasn't he? You're the donor." I nodded once. "I am." He didn't smile, but something shifted in his shoulders, like a man confirming a compass bearing. Price told me this was the only place he'd been in years where he could breathe without feeling the walls close in. Thought I'd see it before the others come. I gestured to the lake. "You're seeing it." He stepped onto the dock, his boots thudding softly on the wet boards, his gaze fixed on the water like he was searching for something only he could recognize. "You ever notice," he said quietly, "how still water can mess with your head? Makes you think it's safe to walk on until it isn't." He tapped the toe of his boot against the edge, sending ripples outward. "Guess that's why this works. You can stand here and know it's deep, and it's still, and you're okay." I nodded, letting the silence stretch, watching a pair of ducks cut a slow wake across the far reeds. After a moment, he asked, softer this time, "You lose someone here?" "Not here," I said, "but this was hers." He didn't ask for more. Combat men rarely do. "Well," he said finally, giving one sharp nod, "now it's ours. We won't waste it." When he left, the gravel crunched beneath his tires, fading fast until all I could hear was the water licking softly against the dock. I stood there a while longer, thinking about what it meant to give something away just to keep the part of yourself that built it. Back inside, I lit the fireplace, not for heat, but because winter light belongs to fire the way summer light belongs to water. The room filled with a slow, patient warmth, and I sat there quietly, watching shadows crawl gently across the walls. That was when the second set of tires rolled up the drive, and this time, I knew before I even turned who it was. Ryan's SUV idled just long enough for me to wonder if he'd leave, but the engine cut, and after a few seconds I heard the door slam. He climbed the porch steps slowly, hands in his coat pockets, his eyes fixed on the grain of the wood, like he was trying to draw courage from its lines. I didn't move, didn't speak. Finally, he stepped inside, holding a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. "I'm not here to fight," he said quietly, his voice stripped bare of its old sharpness. "Good," I said simply, motioning to the chair across from me. He sat, elbows resting on his knees, gaze fixed on the fire. "I left Sophia," he said after a moment. "No ceremony, no build-up, just fact. Been staying in a rental. Told her I needed space, but I think she knew what that really meant." He paused, swallowing, searching for words he didn't have. "I thought winning meant taking the house. Turns out it just meant losing everything else." The flames shifted in the reflection of his eyes, shadows moving like restless thoughts. I didn't rush him, didn't fill the silence with words he hadn't earned yet. After a long moment, he continued, softer now. "I came today because I don't want to be the guy who only calls when he needs something, and I don't want you thinking I showed up to undo what you did. I didn't. I get it now." I poured us each a mug from the thermos, sliding one across the table. "If you want to come back here sometime when it's not full," I said, "talk to Dana. It's her schedule now." He nodded once, the acceptance quiet but real. We talked for half an hour about nothing that could be weaponized later, his rental's leaky water heater, his new job prospects, the fact that he'd started jogging again. Small, unimportant things that mattered only because they carried no weight. When he stood at the door, he hesitated, glancing back at me. "You look better than the last time I saw you," he said softly. I met his gaze. "I am better," I said. He nodded once, then left without promises or handshakes. Just the sound of his footsteps fading across the porch, blending with the soft hush of falling snow. That night, I stayed long enough to watch the first group of veterans arrive, Dana greeting them in the driveway. No speeches, no ceremony, just quiet handshakes and an open door. From the dock, I watched them walk the perimeter, shoulders loosening as boots crunched softly on snow. One man stood at the water's edge for a long time, like Ray had, just staring at the stillness. I didn't interrupt. For the first time since Elaine died, I understood something I'd been missing. The house wasn't mine anymore, but its purpose was, and somehow that was enough. By late January, the first hints of spring thawed along the edges of Silverwood Lake, thin blades of sunlight cutting through the last brittle layers of ice clinging stubbornly to the docks. I drove up early that morning, carrying nothing but a notebook, a chipped mug Elaine had loved, and a small thermos of coffee that smelled like the winters we used to spend here together. The road curved beneath arching pines still dusted white, their shadows long and fragile against the pale sky, and when the villa came into view, something in me stilled. It was quieter now than I had ever known it, but not the defensive, suffocating quiet from months ago. This was open silence, the kind that makes room instead of stealing it. Dana had left a note on the counter again, her handwriting steady, deliberate. Second group arrived yesterday. 3 combat vets, 2 spouses, 1 Gold Star mom. One man hasn't spoken to anyone in 6 months. We'll see if the lake works on him too. She signed it simply. D. Her looping underline as soft and unintrusive as ever. I poured coffee into Elaine's mug and walked out onto the dock, the boards cold beneath my boots, the wind carrying the sharp edge of thawing water. Across the lake, smoke drifted from a single chimney on the far ridge, dissolving into the gray air like breath into winter glass. I thought about the fight we'd lived through, the porch confrontation, the haunting, the legal war, the signatures that changed everything, and realized I was standing on the other side of it now, unchanged and unrecognizable all at once. I'd given away the one place I swore I'd never lose, and somehow I'd kept it anyway, not in deed or paper, but in purpose, the only thing that couldn't be stripped away. Behind me, voices rose faintly from the villa, laughter low and cautious, like a muscle relearning its strength after too long unused. I turned, leaning against the railing, watching 3 men step slowly down the path toward the water, each one carrying invisible weight in the lines of their shoulders. One paused at the shoreline, staring out at the vast steel-blue stillness, his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, and I saw at the smallest shift, the loosening, like a knot pulling itself free. That was Elaine's vision all along, that this house could become a place where people might breathe again. The thought tightened something in my throat, unexpected, sharp. I walked back inside, the warmth of the fireplace stretching its fingers through the main room, and sat at the old table where Elaine used to set mugs of tea on rainy afternoons. Outside the window, snow melted into tiny rivulets that crawled along the edges of the deck, their glint catching brief flashes of light. My phone, face down on the table beside me, buzzed once, soft and persistent, the vibration rippling faintly across the wood. I stared at it for a long moment before turning it over. The screen lit up with a single message from Ryan. 5 words. "I'm ready to talk, Dad." For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, the words blurring at the edges, carrying more weight than any argument we'd had in the past year. Not a demand. Not a threat, not a claim. Just an opening, small, fragile, and real. I didn't reply. Not yet. Some messages don't need answers. They need living proof. And maybe, one day, he'd understand that my silence was its own kind of yes. I stood, walked to the mantel, and rested my hand lightly against the framed photo of Elaine. Her smile caught in golden light, hair curling slightly in the breeze that used to whip off this very lake. "You'd like this," I said quietly. "All of it." Outside, Dana's voice carried faintly as she greeted another couple arriving, boots crunching across fresh snow, their laughter careful, their hope unspoken but palpable. From the window, I watched as they followed her up the path toward the villa, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel protective, territorial, or defensive. The place didn't need guarding anymore. It had purpose now, teeth turned into shelter. I walked back down to the dock, sitting at the edge where the boards warmed faintly beneath the touch of a reluctant sun, sipping from Elaine's chipped mug while the water stretched endlessly in front of me. A thin gust lifted off the lake, carrying the faint scent of cedar and thawing earth, and I closed my eyes, letting it wash through me. Somewhere behind me, in rooms that once held shouting and shadows, voices were filling the air again, soft but growing stronger, like this place was teaching itself how to breathe after holding its breath for too long. I thought about the past months, about boundaries, battles, and paper walls that looked fragile until someone walked face first into them. I thought about what it cost to hold on and what it gave back when you finally learned to let go. And as the wind skimmed across the lake, scattering the last shards of ice into rippling silver, I realized this wasn't about winning anymore. It never had been. Some places you fight for, some places you surrender, and some places, if you're lucky, teach you the difference. The lake stretched endlessly beneath a widening sky, the villa behind me alive with new purpose, and for the first time since Elaine died, I didn't feel like a man trying to reclaim what was lost. I felt like someone building something new. When I finally stood to leave, the boards creaked softly beneath my boots, the water catching and holding the light one last time before letting it go. And that's where today's story ends. But maybe, for David, it's less of an ending and more of a beginning. A man who once fought to hold on discovered the courage to let go, and in doing so, he built something bigger than himself. The Silverwood Lake Retreat is no longer just a house. It's a place where stories of loss and healing unfold quietly, day after day, and where even broken connections can slowly start to mend. If this journey moved you, if you felt the weight of David's choices, Ryan's transformation, or Elaine's memory lingering through it all, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How did the story make you feel? Would you have made the same decisions David did? Share your perspective in the comments. Your voice is part of this conversation. And if you enjoy stories like this, stories about family, redemption, and the quiet power of second chances, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every week we bring you immersive narratives filled with heart, tension, and meaning stories that stay with you long after they end. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Until the next story, take care of the places, the people, and the memories that matter most. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones we fight for ourselves, and sometimes winning means learning when to let go.